We're going to call this meeting to order now. It is 7:03 p.m. on April 3rd, 2023, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Oversight staff. If the Spanish language interpreters could please give the information in Spanish language interpretation, that would be wonderful. And Corinne, you're going to stay on that first slide while the Spanish language interpreter does their work. Yeah, you're going to stay on that slide. Perfect.
Esta reunión es una reunión pública sujeta a la ley del Estado de Oregon y las normas administrativas de la ciudad de Portland y se grabará. Interpretación en español está disponible para esta reunión. Al acceder a la interpretación en español verá la transmisión del video de los oradores, pero la transmisión audio será reemplazada por el intérprete. Para acceder a este servicio, haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas en los controles de la reunión en Zoom, en la parte inferior de la pantalla y seleccione Español.
Thank you so very much. Gracias. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Mary and Christine. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance. But please note, this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to a public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and/or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversations during the meeting and future meetings' agenda topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of the screen. Now I would like to turn the meeting over to the co-chairs to be able to do the land acknowledgement.
Hi, that'll be me. I'm Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm in the co-chairs of the subcommittee on oversight staff. It's so confusing. We have so many different subcommittees so far in this commission. And I'm going to read the land acknowledgement that we're using that comes from the City Hall version. It's not as strong as what I would say if I were writing my own. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Calumet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Molalla, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and looking towards a more equitable and sustainable future along the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you so much, Co-Chair Hantelman. Now we are going to move to the community agreements. I would like each of you to read the agreements to yourself, and then I will ask Corinne to move to the second slide. There's 3 slides here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members in gently and with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in the space while still respecting the community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our colleagues as collaborators if needed? May I see for a form of agreement, jazz hands or lift your hand up? Beautiful. Thank you so very much. Now, I would like to turn the meeting back over to the co-chairs to discuss the timeline.
All right. This meeting is part of the Police Accountability Commission's structures and details phase of work, which focuses on the form of the new system. The future phases of work will develop how the new system relates to the rest of the city government and the transition plan from our current system to the new one. The commission will work until August 31st, 2023, hooray, and will present all proposed changes to the city council for their consideration and approval. Moving on to the next slide. This slide shows the outcome documents for the structure and details phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the commission. This subcommittee focuses on how the staff, led by a director that reports to a new oversight board, will be structured, including the qualifications and hiring process for the director, and qualifications and hiring process for the director, how legal counsel will work, and other staff structures such as mediators and advocates. Moving on to slide 9. So this slide is the current project plan for the structure and details phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. It will be updated as needed throughout this phase of work. This slide is for members of the public to be able to understand how the commission gets from now through the end of the phase, which focuses on identifying areas of agreement among commission members as to the form the new system will take. Today's meeting fits into the green boxes with the red border near the middle of the screen. And following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the PAC. We'd like to highlight this subcommittee has one more meeting scheduled after today on Monday, April 17th. So that's not next Monday, it's Monday after. The next full commission meeting is Thursday, April 12th, which will include a briefing with the City Commissioner, Renee Gonzalez. And we have an open community engagement event at East Portland Community Center this Saturday, April 8th, from 12 to 2 p.m.
Thank you so very much.
And the purpose of today's meeting is today's meeting agenda includes time for members to update on what they worked on since our last meeting on March 13th, followed by co-chairs walkthrough of the updated outline, and then discuss on what should be included as the outline is eventually turned into the draft areas of agreement on oversight staff. And there's also an open public comment period on the agenda.
Beautiful. All right. So member updates since 3/13. I would like to facilitate that conversation if there are any updates that committee members would like to provide.
I'd like to start if that's okay.
Really, please.
First of all, we have welcomed a new member, not only of the commission, but of the subcommittee, Tim Pitts. I was able to speak with Tim a little bit, just to find out more about his background and so forth the other day, and I really appreciate you being part of this subcommittee. Thank you for being here. Second of all, Co-Chair Amechi and I went through the document that we reviewed at the previous meeting and took all the areas where we, consensed or said we can move on that were highlighted in green and moved it into the top of the document. We're going to kind of briefly skim through that part tonight before we get started on the rest of the document that we didn't get to last time. Third of all, and this is a real important part because this just happened after the co-chairs meeting before today's meeting, so nobody has this information except for me right now. I went through the 3 documents from the last phase and did a search for the word director, because there's a section that you'll see about the director's qualifications and authority and responsibilities, and it's an empty section right now. And these are the only things I found that the director, where the word director is mentioned in the 3 documents we created in the last phase. One has to do with extending timelines to file complaints, one has to do with sitting at the collective bargaining table, and one has to do with reviewing the recommendations made about deadly force incidents. So we didn't really spell out a lot of specific things for the director. Most of the stuff is about the staff in general. We have a separate document where we kind of outline those broader duties. Anything else you want to add? Anybody else on the subcommittee, starting perhaps with the co-chair, Amechi?
I feel like you covered maybe everything that I probably would say. I don't really have anything to add, and I might have things to add later as we're going through the outline, but right now, nothing really.
Oh, that reminds me, actually, though, thank you for saying that. So that when we were going through the document, in addition to moving things around to make it a little bit more flow a little bit better, we came up with some ideas that are going to be in the little comments over on the side of the document that we're hoping that we can discuss and maybe work into the document tonight if everybody is agreeable to that, because we didn't want to make changes to the substance of the document outside of a public meeting.
Thank you so much. So do we want to discuss any updates since 3/13?
I think that's what that was. I think.
Well, I don't know if other people have updates or not. Sorry, Commissioner Monica.
Oh, I just know that I was going to meet with Dan and maybe Ajay, but my schedule completely, blew out the water. So I have not done anything since last meeting, and I'm really happy that Dan and Ajay got together and did this. So I'm glad that we're moving forward, because I was worried about that.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much. Then on to the slide 14 to talk about the draft areas of agreement. I believe next slide. Yeah. Walkthrough of the outline. Co-chairs walkthrough of the outline. Yes.
Okay, so our staff has added this table of contents to sort of show you what we're dealing with. So there's, in general, and I don't want to, we're going to read through this when we hopefully get through the end of what we didn't finish last time. So we're not going to dwell on this too much right now. But what we did was we took the areas that were listed in the scope and agenda document and fleshed them out a little bit, because as I've said a few times, we wrote that scope and agenda document in January of 2022, over a year ago, and we didn't really know everything that we would need to put into the list of what staff's going to do. So we added a couple of little things, which you'll see when we get back to this. And now if you scroll down to the actual text, so then we took up like I said, these pieces that we highlighted in green last time. If there was a question about something, there's a question mark. There'll be some comments on the side that we're going to have to revisit. Hopefully we can get those tonight. They were put into these different categories. As for example, here in B, in section B, you see it says staff structure, which is which was listed in the original document. Then we added qualifications, duties, and board involvement and hiring, because those are things what we talked about at the last meeting that didn't fit into existing category. So you can scroll down some more. There's a lot of ideas about what kind of people we should hire, or the board should hire, the board director should hire, what their qualifications should be, what their duties should be. And staff helpfully put a lot of the footnotes in about where these ideas came from, so that people looking at this later will know that we didn't make it up out of whole cloth. And then in C, we have the position within the city and the office location, and then there's a section on hours of operation, which is not filled in yet, but we'll get to that tonight. So that's kind of the general outline what our document's going to look like when we finish it. So the idea is we'll get more substance to put in there tonight by going through the rest of the draft, and then we'll come back next time with a document that looks a lot like what we're going to turn over to the full commission at the last meeting on the 17th. So what you're seeing now is the research that we used to create that outline, and the green highlights are the things that we moved up. And there's somewhere in this document there it says end of March 13th subcommittee meeting. Anything you want to add, Co-Chair MHC, before we launch into this?
Nope, nothing to add. Let's get into it.
Okay, so I'll let you do the first two items, because there are things that you suggested during our collation meetings.
So
All
we're moving-
right.
So we're moving into discussion, right? Is that it?
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to remind us that we are going to go into the discussion, and we ask that we follow normal rules. Please be brief each time you speak, even though you can speak multiple times, and please be facilitated. And remember that we're using a weighted stack in our discussion. And finally, please be forward-looking in your comments. Go right ahead, co-chairs. Yay, we're off and running.
All right. So sorry, let me just fix my screen a little bit. Yeah, so we talked about when me and Dan met, we talked about audits being conducted and what kind of things will be audited. So audits conducted by staff will include police practices, policies, directives, including regular audits of police communications with the public, including news releases, social media, etc. And I brought that in because of the effect that media has on police accountability, and also the problematic history of police media in Portland and outside of it. And so yeah, and then I'll read the second thing too, and I'm curious what people's thoughts are on that. So another thing is alone or in cooperation with other city agencies and bureaus. Board staff will also audit police surveillance and other technologies. And I mentioned this as a result of meeting specifically last week with some city employees that do a lot of this work around auditing police surveillance, or they're supposed to, but they are woefully understaffed and underfunded. And so I was thinking that could be another thing that the oversight agency can house, since it's something that other agencies aren't able to do because of a lack of resources. And of course, it's very important to know what technologies the police are using and how are they using those technologies. So yeah, I guess we open it up for some comment, questions, thoughts.
Yep, that's the question at hand. Any discussion or questions around these two? Commissioner Catherine, please.
I just want to say, I think both are great suggestions. Thank you.
Anyone else? Commissioner Monica?
I really like them both. I was another thing that has been problematic, and I don't know if this is the place to add it to, but an audit or review of the training materials that is used for new recruits, or for, that has been extremely problematic in recent history, even just police practices, policies under, would that include that?
I would take that as a friendly amendment. I think we should put, police practices, policies, training, and directives.
Mm-hmm.
Any other additions? Commissioner Ajay?
Sorry, I thought that I was putting my hand down, but I was raising it up. But I wanted to second that point. And I like how Danny says training and not just training materials, because I think it's really important to be auditing the training itself, like the mentorship and all these other things, because that's where the real learning happens, not in classrooms, not in manuals, but in the mentorship and the peer kind of training that happens. So I'm not sure if there's a way to capture that specifically, but I feel like training in general kind of covers it.
Any other comments or questions? Can we move on? Very good, we can move on. Next section.
All right, so a lot of this section is about the existing board and barriers to accountability that we found in our second phase, I guess. We don't need to read all of this into the record, but because there's another subcommittee working on what the board itself is doing. But an important thing that's flagged here is that civilian volunteers not receive sufficient ongoing training. So there's a question that I raised, and I don't know the answer to this, is the staff going to be responsible to train the new board members, or once the board members are up to speed, will they train each other? Is that something we want to try to put into the city code or our recommendation to council, or is it something that we just sort of leave as an open question?
Thoughts?
How many, I'm sorry, a basic question. How many people will be on the board?
That's not our department. Well, right now, what was floated at the other subcommittee was a board of about 25 people, or maybe more, but that was the number that was listed last time.
So that's on the one. So if there is a bit of turnover, then I'm sorry, I should be raising my hand with the thing.
Go right ahead.
Okay. No, I was just thinking that with that large of a group that perhaps it makes more sense to have the expertise within the group to be able to train people up. But if there is that much turnover, with constantly being turnover with that large of a group, then maybe you do want to have a dedicated staff person to make sure that it always goes smoothly.
Thank you. Monica, Commissioner Monica.
I mean, one of the things that we do is when we hire a new provider into our call pool, for example, for like a month or two, we're buddied up with somebody that's been there a long time to just get in, train the train to trainer model. So to make sure that everything is very clear and there's a lot of ongoing support, elbow support for a period of time before independent, and at a certain point is they're like, okay, leave me alone. I think I can do this, right? And then at that point, okay, you're good. But I think that buddy system is super, super helpful when a job is so complex and overwhelming.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Co-Chair Dan?
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that maybe what we should suggest is a hybrid system where the staff gives some basic training about the rules and laws and bylaws and so forth, but that then there be follow-up mentoring by the board. We don't have to be very specific about what that looks like, but I like that idea very much. Does that sound like about what you're saying? So staff, are you able to capture that? Basically, I don't know if you heard what I was saying.
Recommending a hybrid approach on, yes, bylaws. Yeah. Beautiful. Staff?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that the staff training would probably have to include, similar to members of the commission, like your responsibilities as a public official, that type of thing. Which I think most of the members of this commission may recall having to get that on the way in. That's sort of a responsibility task to any public official, including members of the new oversight board. So just wanted to flag that.
Thank you so much. Staff, do you mind rolling up to, board compensation? So I just want to clarify that the board is participants. Oh, this is barriers, right? This would be a barrier. Is not.
Those are barriers of the existing system.
Got
And
it.
there's the discussion going on in the other subcommittee about whether the board members are going to be paid. And one of the reasons this is in both groups is that if there's a lot, like if there's 25 board members who are paid full time, that's going to really narrow down how much staff we can suggest. So, but I think we're working together to figure that all out.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. I apologize. Very good. Okay. Any other questions or discussion around these 4 things?
Well, I want to go into the mental health thing if everybody's okay with the training idea that we just talked about.
Okay. Yes.
I see
Go right ahead.
Senator Arce's hand up though.
I was sorry, I was just going to say that I think, the little bit of training that we get on bylaws and basic expectations is just so minuscule that there really needs to be some kind of organized curriculum that people go through before you get that peer side by side mentoring model for a period of time. I think the basic training that somebody gets when they sign on to this kind of thing is just not enough.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Commissioner Dan, do you want to?
Yeah, well, I know I agree with you. I kind of feel like we can leave that a little bit vague, but I think that we should stress that the training from the other board members will be part of it. Because my experience as a producer for video at cable access facility is that the same thing happens there, where here's how you can use the machine, and this is how you edit from this to this. But then when you really want to know what to do, you have another producer that's done it for a long time work with you. So I think you're right, but I don't want to be too specific. But I think that's a great point.
Thank you so much. Do you want to continue on?
Yeah, I'll
regarding-
do mental health and I'll turn it back over to my co-chair. So mental health, and this is in here because we said about how it affected the community members who are on the current system, but this is probably true for the staff as well. So doing civilian oversight, including reviewing alleged police misconduct, is taxing on the emotional and mental health of everybody. Community members who volunteer as part of the accountability system and staff people do not receive adequate mental health support, especially exacerbated for those who, due to their own lived experience, may be more affected by the work of civilian oversight. And I think that's all true for people who will probably be working on the staff as well. So I think I'm not sure what category this fits in, but I think we should make a point of ensuring that there's mental health support for the staff in the new system. And what other people think about that?
Commissioner Monica?
I totally agree, for sure. And I wonder if, if city employees have some form of employee assistance program like EAP as a big organization that has benefits for their employees. I wonder if, they would definitely be able to take advantage of that, or even board members and all the staff.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Monica. Staff?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. And yes, city employees do have access to an employee assistance program in EAP. It is potentially notable, depending on what answers this subcommittee comes up with to other questions about contractors, though. That as you're working your way down, there may be a couple categories or groups of people that are providing services that previous phases of work have said that the board needs, and that may end up being sent to contractors, mediators, and advocates, for example, which don't necessarily have access to an EAP. And then for anyone asking about or curious about where the volunteer side of this will go, the other subcommittee is working on that part of it for the board members. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? Co-Chair Ajay.
Yeah, I was wondering about the mental health thing, because it's one thing to have like access to insurance, but that doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to actually have access to therapy. Like those are two different things. And so, in a lot of professions that are taxing, they have mental health professionals on staff. So all you need to do is like make an appointment with the person on staff rather than going online, see who your person covers, seeing if it's in your area, seeing if they have, spaces open, because I can tell you right now, they don't. Like most psychologists in Portland, like everyone I know is struggling to find someone. So I don't know what the answer is to that, but I feel like that's an important thing to recognize, that just because they might have benefits does not make it so they actually have access to a person. And if we want to ensure access, that would mean having someone on staff.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I wonder, do we know about the details of there is a city EAP, I know that. Do we know if they have licensed therapists that might be available to the staff of the new board?
Do you want that as a comment?
I guess unless somebody can answer the question, yeah.
Very good. Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this? Can we move on? Thank you so much. Complexity.
All right, complexity. Hours of operation. Most city offices, including most of the city's current accountability system, operates between 8 and 5 p.m. For complainants with less flexible schedules, who often are lower and middle income individuals, this is a direct barrier to participation as well as to receiving information and updates. And then there's a comment from Dan about, the board's offices shall be open to accept complaints for longer hours than Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, including early morning, weekend times, and evenings. And that's expanded from New York, San Francisco's officer accountability areas of agreement, from officer accountability areas of agreement. Thoughts?
Commissioner Tim.
Yeah, I totally agree that different hours besides just 9 to 5 seems like a critical thing, because it seems like every effort that we can make to ensure that people not only know where to go, but they can get there easily and be heard seems really important. So I think that's very smart.
Thank you. Commissioner Monica, and then Co-Chair Dan.
Boy, I'm borrowing a lot of things that I learned from work, but you know, one of the things that we do at our clinic is to when we designed our expanded hours model, we opened from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And so people would work 10-hour days, 4 days a week. And so we had less people in clinic at all times. And schedules were shifted so that we always had the critical roles available for those 10-hour days, right? But we were able to open also on Saturday. So we were open 10 hours, Monday through Saturday, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. And it gave people the opportunity to work 4 10-hour days, so have 3 days off in a row. So it was a model that worked for us for a while. COVID threw everything out the window, but it worked.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Dan.
Yeah, well, I think we benefit a little bit from not being that specific in our recommendations, but I like that you just mentioned. But one of the things I want to make perhaps a more concrete suggestion is that kind of idea you just talked about, Commissioner Arce, that staggering people's work weeks and what hours they work would be really good. So that way, nobody has to work a 12-hour shift, but the office could be open for 12 hours a day from time to time. And especially if the board is meeting in the evenings, which is likely if they're volunteers, that way staff can be staffing the meeting without having to work since 9 a.m. all the way until whenever the meetings are over. So yeah, just something about staggering the work times of the various staff people.
Thank you so much. Any other comments or questions, discussion on this topic? Can we move on? I see jazz hands. Thank you so much. Best practices.
Right. Best practices, civilian staff involvement. The current system has multiple avenues for frontline staff to be involved in the investigative process. For example, IPR staff can go directly to the scene of officer deadly force incidents. Additionally, civilian staff can complete intake and intake investigations. Staff can do mostly independent investigations and have nominal subpoena power for documents and people. Just looking at the comments. All right. All right. And qualifications of investigators. The current system has experienced investigators, IPR and internal affairs investigators collaborate, team up, advise, consult, and share information, knowledge, and experience about how to conduct investigations. All of these investigations have prior investigative experience, including experience with sex abuse, homicides, criminal personnel, and administrative investigations. And Dan has a comment about currently IPR investigators get trained alongside PPB, internal affairs investigators. Having the oversight agency collaborate or train with police bureaus can compromise the independence of the new board. Oh, actually, that's my comment, but Dan just wrote it down. And then we also have a comment about adding social work, including child services, medical, and insurance investigators to this list. And I know we talked a little bit about this already, but I'm curious if anyone has thoughts, comments, feelings. etc.
Co-chair Dan?
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that you're, by not saying anything, that means that you're agreeing with what Commissioner or Co-Chair Meiji just said about the concern about compromising the integrity of the new board by having them co-train with the police. That's bothered me. It's actually something the DOJ suggested that the city do. But in the first one, I just wanted to make sure that we didn't lose the little note there that says that, to consider the availability for staff to be able to go on scene for these deadly force incidents, because there's no control over when that happens. So somebody's going to have to be on call, basically. Again, going back to Commissioner Arce's job, where you might have to be on call at any hour of the day to go do what they need you to do.
Any other observations, questions, discussion? Can we move on?
Actually, before we move on, I just realized something that we've been talking about in this community for many years, which is that right now the police are required to do an investigation whenever force is used against a community member and make a report about it. It's not the same thing as a administrative investigation about whether there was misconduct. It's just an investigation into it. And if they think there's misconduct, then they turn it over to internal affairs. So there may be other cases other than deadly force where we want to see the investigators go out to the scene, right? Where there's some kind of force that could be excessive force. So I'd like to capture that somehow, say, directed to the scene of deadly force and other serious incidents or something like that, so that we can leave it vague enough that we can define them later, but not narrow it down to just deadly force.
Very good. Okay. Can we move on? Very good. Next section, when staff is ready.
I'll pass it back to Dan
Thank you.
or Commissioner Andival.
Thank you. This is stuff that we pulled from the last phase, from the officer accountability document, where we had stuff that came up along the way that didn't fit into the last phase. So, and we then, Commissioner Amechi and I added some thoughts that were previously at the end of this document. We moved them up here. So, intake. Assigning advocates and navigators to complainants upon intake, that's something we agreed to in the last phase. Question is, do these assistants come from a city employee pool, a community organization, contractors, or other? And then in our discussion, Co-Chair Meiji pointed out the trauma intervention program, which intervenes when there's a police having a conflict or contact, I think, with someone in crisis. They have over 200 volunteers, and it could be a good pipeline for the advocate position. So I guess I'll pause here, because if there's other ideas about where advocates can come from, well, maybe let me read the other stuff, and then it'll give you a better idea of what we need. So a question, how many advocates will be needed? And figuring that there would be about 400 complaints a year, which is what the rate was before COVID and the uprisings, and that about 280 of them are going to get fully investigated. You need to have at least 10 advocates who have 28 clients a year. And we talked about having people who have, knowledge, cultural, and knowledge about culturally specific sensitivities and norms, so that they will be welcoming to the people who are trying to make the complaint. This is one of the biggest problems we have now. And the question is, will they be part-time? Another question, and that is added with a note that says how much of this work can be done remotely. And we don't know if that's a transition question or something to discuss in this phase. And then the last point is about the advocates having continuing education and community education about the process. So discuss mental health as noted above, make sure that the advocates also are covered by that, because I'll tell you, when you're listening to people's complaints about what the police have done to them for a long time, it rubs off on you too. All right, so given all those ideas, are there other pipelines? And I mean, I'm hoping that people accept the idea of the trauma intervention program, but are there other ideas about the pipeline of who could be these advocates?
Commissioner Monica?
So I have a question. Are these advocates paid positions, part of staff, or is it a volunteer pool of advocates that are getting assigned to people according to their cultural identity, background, and things like that? I forget what the design was in this particular spot.
Well, I don't think we had that. I don't think we had that full discussion. I think that the contemplation of the board of the commission right now is that these folks will be paid, but they won't necessarily be full time. So that they'd be either on staff part time, like right there, either in the office or on the phone. That's where we talked about the question about remote, and that then maybe they would be available, be on call if that's a model that works, but not necessarily that they'd be full-time city employees. That way they're closer to the community.
Right, because it would be wonderful to have a pool that we could diversify so much that they could be advocates for people that share their culture, share their language, share their background, and like have a more culturally informed, trauma-informed advocacy, right? Navigating like that would be lovely, but we wouldn't be able to hire that many.
Commissioner Tim and then staff. Thank you, Commissioner Monica.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think hearing the rationale for why it would be such a benefit to have so many different individuals in this role is informative and has a lot of value. And I think that should definitely be spelled out in this document so that that is clear that that's the intention, because otherwise I feel like having 10 part-time positions just adds a layer of complexity for staffing the organization that usually you'd want to have a simpler setup and have fewer people that are working more hours, but having the benefit of the diversity is great. So I think that should just be spelled out more.
Thank you, Commissioner Tim, staff, and then Co-Chair Ajay.
Yeah, just a comment and then a question. So the comment is this 280 number for those who haven't necessarily gotten down to the bottom of the document, and for the public who may not have scrolled all the way down yet, is at the bottom. And it's that the Commissioner, Co-Chair Dan mentioned the 400 number, but that the dismissal rate is about 43%. And there's a expectation that with the new system as outlined in the officer accountability document that the PAC has already approved, that rate would go down to 30%, which if you do the math comes out to 280 complaints a year. But the question that I have relates to that, which is for the dismissals, that's after a preliminary investigation, which means that the advocate, there would be an advocate for those 120 people too. If I understand it correctly.
Yeah.
It's
So
just that
I guess they do 40 cases a year then.
Thank you.
You want to change that in the notes, staff? If you don't mind.
I don't think it's necessarily explicitly,
Okay,
because a client, so that the amount of time that one spends with a case that goes all the way through to the end as an advocate would probably be significantly different and greater than advocating for a member of the public filing a complaint that is eventually dismissed. And certainly there's other points along the way of the document that would affect the amount of time as well. If it goes to mediation, supervisor response, there's all the different things. So I don't know that I could, as staff, make a blanket edit to that. Just wanted to raise the question, make sure I understood the nature of the role as outlined in that document. Thanks.
great, thank you. Co-Chair Ajay.
One thing that I was wondering about, it just came to mind. So I volunteer with Lines for Life, like the hotline, and they also have like a racial advocacy part of that. So if you call and you're like, I want to speak to, you know, a Black person or Latino person, whatever. But for the most part, Lines for Life folks are volunteers. Almost everyone's a volunteer, but they also have paid staff that have fulfilled specific requirements. And so I wonder if that's also another option of like, okay, maybe we have like the generic, like, you know, volunteers that are doing the work, but we also have paid staff that are multilingual or have culturally specific knowledge or something like that, because it seems really important to compensate people, but like also, will we have enough money? Who knows? So just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you. Commissioner Catherine.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought that last suggestion from Jay was really good. The idea of having kind of a mixture of paid staff and volunteers, or paid staff, full-time staff with perhaps part-time advocates. That makes sense to me. But what I was actually going to say, something I mentioned to Co-Chair Dan previously, which is that one of the items of feedback that we've gotten in some of the community engagement sessions I've been to have been around the particular challenges of bringing sexual harassment type charges or complaints against the police, that is an area of particular sensitivity and particular challenge, I think, for complainants. And so in addition to cultural sensitivity, I just want to make a note that I think we need to have people trained in just the issues around sexual abuse, sexual harassment, and just so that those particular complaints are handled with the sensitivity they require. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Dan.
Right. So I'd like to add like kind of a suggestion that all of the advocates be trained in sexual assault survivals and mental health and you know, cultural sensitivities and appropriate responses. That ideally a person will be hooked up with somebody that they ask for, but if not, then everybody has the training they need to at least make their way through it in a way that's not going to, you know, push the person away. So put something in our document about, you know, training everybody.
Thank you. I'm letting staff finish here. Co-Chair Ajay.
Just a real quick thing about, you know, the idea of like culturally competent versus like culturally specific, because like we can train people to be culturally competent to not like offend people outright as best they can, but you can't train somebody in another culture. It's just like not possible. I mean, unless they live there for a decade or more, you know, but culture is so complex and multifaceted that it's just not really, you know, something that is possible to train people in, but we can train people in cultural competency and like, you know, sensitivity. So just wanted to name that.
Thank you so much. Any other questions, comments, discussion? Co-Chair Dan.
Well, kind of looping back to my original question, I think that law students and maybe people doing social work degrees might be a place where you find people who be looking for part-time work, where this would fit into their, you know, their life goals and their training as well. So that's just an idea.
Thank you. Anyone else? Can we move on? I see jazz hands. Yes, we can. And I am going to ask us to take a break for 5 minutes, 6 minutes until 8:05. And so, yes, let's do that. Come back at 8:05, pretty please. We're going to take a break. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and go back into our document at investigations. Yes, investigations. Co-chairs?
All right, that's my, oops. Sorry, can you all see me? All right, investigations. So who should be hired as investigators? From the barriers document, if an investigator is former law enforcement, community members may see them as members of the police department. Further, community members do not differentiate between civilian and sworn members of PPB. It is confusing, frustrating, and intimidating to discuss your complaint about PPB with a current or former employee of PPB. Thoughts? Or I guess, yeah. Anyone have any thoughts about that before I continue?
I don't see anything.
All right. Wait, did someone raise their hand? No? Okay. And all right, so in terms of how many investigators, so currently there are 6 investigators at IPR and 8 at Internal Affairs, so that's 14 total. And they're assigned about 30 investigations in 2021. There was over 200 complaints. From 280 non-dismissed complaints, you can assume that maybe there's 200 full investigations, 50 mediations, maybe like 30 informal resolutions. These are all, just assumptions and guesstimations, but we don't have those numbers yet. But yeah, so that would be about 5 to 10 cases per year per investigator, depending on the complexity. And probably based on these numbers, you would probably need about 28 investigators, an average of 7 cases per investigator, lasting 70 days each for 200 investigations. Anything?
Sorry about stepping on your words there, co-chair. Didn't mean to.
No, you're the facilitator. I'm the one that's stepping on your toes there.
Any questions or discussion? Commissioner Monica.
Would we have a chance to run these numbers by our current investigators and see what they think of the numbers and the calculations? Maybe they have a sense of the number of investigations that wouldn't go through the process because there isn't enough staff to go through, or right? Like maybe they have a better sense of the numbers so that we're not, I feel like we're kind of guessing here. Of course we are, but you know what I mean.
Co-chair Dan.
Yeah, no, we're entirely well, this is based on guesstimations, desires, and what the numbers look like if you look at the current IPR annual reports. And yes, indeed, part of the reason they dismiss so many cases is because they don't have enough staff. And this board is going to have, we think, as many as 56 staff members. But we've already, and when we double back to the top, you'll see we've already divvied up about 16 different kinds of staff people to be among those 56. And we're going to try to reserve some of the money to, for stipends and whatnot to pay the board. So I don't think we're going to write down the number of investigators into the proposal to City Council or anything. I think this is just more of a worksheet for us to think about when we're saying this is how many people we want to do mediation, this is how many people we want to do this and that, and community outreach, and like, are we building too big of an infrastructure to make sure that the cases themselves get investigated. So that's really what these numbers are for. So, you know, it says 7 cases, 70 days. That's a lot more than 360 days, but that's because, you know, an investigator's not necessarily spending their whole day working on the same case for 70 days in a row. Except there will be cases like deadly force cases, which are very complicated, where it's going to take up more of their time. So I think these numbers will probably shake out, but I don't disagree with sharing them with IPR and even internal affairs to see what they think.
Thank you so much. Staff?
Yeah, very happy to share with the relevant folks and get feedback there as well. It should be noted that the only types of in the charter, the only types of staff that are explicitly required, which is not to say you can't do more, but the sort of minimum is professional administrative staff and professional investigators. So with relation to not building, other things are possible, but they can't be at the expense of that without violating the charter. So that's I think just to build a little bit more on what Co-Chair Dan just mentioned there. And we hadn't yet gotten that far, but we're almost to it. So I figured I'd scroll down.
Thank you for that. Any other comments or questions? Okay, let's continue on.
Should the board write or at least approve rules set by the director? IPR code 3.21.170K states IPR shall adopt, promulgate, amend and rescind rules and procedures required for the discharge of the director's duties, including policies and procedures for receiving. Can you scroll up my, I guess I could turn my captions off. My captions are blocked. Thanks. Including policies and procedures for receiving and processing complaints, conducting investigations, and reporting findings, conclusions, and recommendations. And the Citizen Review Committee is supposed to advise on operations. That's IPR code 3.21.090A.
Any discussion or questions? Staff?
Yeah, if you're familiar with the PSF documents that have been shared around, so you may see that there's like code with the numbering system that looks like the 3.21. The other documents that have been shared around are administrative rules adopted by the Bureau. Their PSF 5.01 is the documents. You may have seen those in other citations. Those are examples of rules that are issued by Bureau directors that would fall under the question that's being asked here. So they're subservient to city code, and of course, both subservient to city charter and you know, all the other law, but they are rules governing the staff operations and things like that. Co-Chair Dan has just put a link in the chat to them as well. So and they're different from like rules governing the operations of the board itself, which would be bylaws. But these are more on the staff side. So you can see an example there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Co-Chair Dan.
Well, actually, the example that I pasted in is the procedure for the Citizen Review Committee to hold hearings. So this was for the whole agency of the IPR, and it includes quite a few that direct what the volunteer board does right now. So I think it is possible that there's going to be stuff that gets embedded in city policies that applies to the board. And so on that note, I think what my recommendation around this question would be that, yes, the director should create the policies for the staff with input from the board, input and perhaps for approval by the board, but that the board should be able to write its own policies. And I don't know what other people think about that, but that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Co-Chair Dan. Any other discussion or questions? We'll move on to mediation and we'll let staff continue taking notes.
All right, mediation. Have at least one staff person who's dedicated to mediations, part or full-time. Portland likely would need far less than the 130 mediators used in San Francisco. Consider paid professional mediators rather than volunteers. And one thing we talked about as far as hiring goes is do outreach to create a pipeline of employees for the board by engaging people in the community. And I suggested that because we want this board, this agency to be staffed of people from the community, right? So people feel like they can trust it. And so, if there's a high schooler or a college student that wants to be part of this, they should be able to know what is the pipeline for getting into this work and for doing this. So curious what people's thoughts are.
I'm not seeing any. Yeah, Commission Co-Chair Dan.
Well, just because some of these things are, it says consider. So I'm hoping that people like the idea of paid professional mediators instead of volunteers, that they can be kind of contractors or on call, or the kind of thing that we're talking about with the advocates, where they're not necessarily full-time. But then we said that one staff person who'd be dedicated to the mediation, meaning scheduling them and setting them up. We could also suggest that they also be able to conduct them, but I don't know if that's something that people want to say. But at least that so that there's a program that is coherent and that functions, instead of it just being something. Oh yeah, we have mediation, which is kind of what's happened in our current system a little bit.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Monica.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I am also hoping that our system would use mediators more often than they have historically. They're therefore hoping to have at least a staff that would organize this and like you said, some kind of a person to schedule and organize and make sure it happens. But sometimes this kind of thing, if we start using mediation a lot, could also take away a lot of your budget, because you're paying so much for a professional mediator outside of your staff to, when you could hire some like 3 or 4 to be part of staff and provide benefits and be able to save some money in that. I'm not sure. I guess we'd have to see or possibly put it in there, start as paid professional mediators, consider hiring our own mediators if this service is being used enough to consider that, right? Something like that.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Commissioner Tim.
Yeah, quick question, and I'm sorry if this is something everybody already knows, but I'm struck by how much of what we're talking about is paid people versus volunteer positions and full-time versus part-time and contractors versus city employees. And so I'm just curious, like, as we're spelling out the structure in a document, like, do we have like an org chart or something like that where we're sort of tracking? Because I understand we feel like there's 56 FTEs, I feel like I saw in one of the documents I reviewed the other day, for, staffing up this organization. And so I'm just curious, like, how we're sort of keeping track of like the overall big picture. So then we decide, like the mediators, the advocates, like what did the positions all add up to budget wise, and what are we, going to be able to do here?
Co-Chair Ajay, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the best answer or anything, but I mean, I was sort of assuming the more granular, like things like an org chart would be more like the transition phase. Because there's so many variables that we don't know about that it's sort of hard to create like I would think it would be hard to create a staff chart based on so many things are up in the air right now. And in the transition phase, as we're making like concretizing things, maybe I'm hoping that we'll be able to actually do things like create an org chart. And also the reason why, I raised my hand initially was I've been a contractor in Portland for the city, and I've been a contractor in other cities too, like New York. And typically, the reason why I'm a contractor and not a paid employee is because of hiring freezes that the city has, like in both instances. And so I was wondering how that would affect the board if there was like a citywide hiring freeze, or if there's something where we can even, say that because it's I don't know, a very important, they're all important, right? I don't know. So it's hard to know how hiring freezes will affect the ability to provide like full-time benefited staff, because the idea is that contractors are actually in a lot of cases much cheaper because you don't have to provide those expensive city benefits. And that's kind of one of the reasons why cities use contractors. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Staff?
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know that there's another place in city code for any other bureau where an org chart is included. So I'm not sure. And I think as co-chairs previously mentioned earlier today, the numbers, for example, with relation to how many investigators, that's unlikely to be included so much as it's a sketch to try and build a structure that works. In terms of how the 56 number was arrived at, that's roughly scaling up the $3 million from IPR. Their budget has led to 14 FTE, and scaling that up to the 12.5. It's down here and the 20. Yeah, so you can see it here. Scaling that up to the estimated $12.5 million of which is the minimum budget guaranteed by 5% of the current police budget. The current police budget could change by the time the new oversight board is implemented. That's where the 56 number comes from. But in terms of beyond that this is not something that's normally in code. I do agree with co-chair Jay that it would likely be in the transition, but probably in the transition itself, as opposed to in the transition. Like the plan might include develop an org chart as opposed to what the org chart would be. If that makes sense, that would typically be how it works, but obviously it's up to the commission what to recommend. Just wanted to give a little clarity there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go back to Commissioner Tim, and then I'll go to Co-Chair Dan.
Thanks, and I'll be brief because I took up too much time with this question in the first place, but thanks, that is super helpful. And yeah, I didn't expect that it gets to that level of detail. It just seems like as we're talking about in such detail about like these people should be paid, these should be volunteers, it just made me wonder, are we tracking at all sort of the total, big picture of what we're proposing here and making sure that what we propose is actually achievable? Because I just didn't see sort of where things add up, which is kind of how I like to think about things sometimes, is what all are we, doing in total here. So it sounds like that's definitely a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. Co-Chair Dan.
Well, I was going to point you to the bottom of the document too, but also I will pledge to take the ideas that we've thrown about here previously and today, and put them into a spreadsheet, and so we can figure out, what we're saying, how many people we're envisioning be full-time and part-time people, so we can get a better idea of what we've already outlined. And that doesn't have to be something that is presented to City Council for a vote. It's just something so that we can wrap our minds around it. I think that's what you're asking for, Commissioner Pitts, if I'm wrong. Yeah. So I agree with you. I think it'd be helpful for us to have a working document like that. So I'll pledge to work on it. Okay. Sorry, that's all I had.
That's all right. Great. Any other questions or discussion? Can we move on? Thank you for the jazz hands. Let's move on.
So I think we're at a new section now, so I should kind of go over this. And this stuff is stuff we're not discussing because this is in the charter and we can't change. It's etched in there in stone. Take a vote of the people to move it. But this is just the thing that outlines that the board will hire the director, and then that the director will manage the professional administrative staff and professional investigators and make operational and administrative decisions. So that's where our idea that the board should approve those policies might be seen by some as in conflict with this, because it says the director can make those decisions. But I think that it's also clear that the board is hiring them in the next part, where it says, well, in that part, it says the board shall hire a director. It says the board director, the bureau director, for the purposes of the charter, will be appointed by and serve at the will and pleasure of the board. So they all have a lot of say in whether or not that person continues. Professional staff, other than the director, will be appointed and serve under the direction of the director as classified employees. Okay, so that's just give us the the things that we have to work within. And then the second part of the charter we pasted in here has to do with independent authority. And this goes back to a question that came up a minute ago too, a little bit. The board shall have authority to exercise independent judgment in performing all legally assigned powers and duties. The mayor, city council, auditor, and city departments, bureaus, and administrative agencies shall not interfere in the exercise of the board's independent judgment. So one could interpret that, Co-Chair Meiji, as saying, well, if there's a hiring freeze for the general city, this is an independent agency, and maybe they can make their own decisions. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to say that's true, but could be read that way. And then the last piece is about the physical office of the board that's going to be located outside of the Portland Police Bureau facility, which so that's in the charter. So we already had this little discussion about that last meeting.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions around these two sections? Can we move on? We can move on when staff is ready.
Co-Chair, do you want to do the city code, or you want me to start with that?
Yeah, you can do it.
Okay, well, thanks. Okay, no, just kidding. All right, so Portland City Code. So this is the current way the IPR director is selected and removed. And we're not saying at all that we're suggesting that all of this be adopted, but what I'd like to ask you all to do is help us highlight the parts that we want to keep, if any. So A, the city council, obviously that's already wrong right there. The city council shall select the director in accordance with the city's human resource policies and rules and other applicable laws. So we might want to think about the city's human resource policies and rules and applicable laws as something that might guide the board hiring the director. 1, each council member shall select a member of their staff to be part of the recruitment and selection process. 2, the selected council staff shall work with the director of the Bureau of Human Resources or designee to create a job posting that comports with the necessary and desired qualifications for a director. 3, the director of BHR designee shall assess minimum qualifications and provide the eligibility list to the selected council staff, who shall then determine at least 3 candidates best qualified to interview. 4, the selected council staff shall interview the candidates, and top scoring candidates shall be moved forward. 5, the top scoring candidate shall be presented to the council for consideration and vote. And 6, council shall determine whether the presented candidate is well suited for the position and may vote to either appoint the candidate or not to appoint the candidate. And if not appointed, then the selected council staff shall present the next top scoring candidate to the council for consideration. Phew, it's very detailed. And this is in city code right now. The selection process shall continue as stated until council votes to appoint a candidate as IPR director. This shall include reopening the recruitment process if none of the interviewed candidates are appointed by city council. Okay, and before we move on, I'll just do B here, because this also talks about the qualifications. The director shall be a person of recognized judgment, objectivity, and integrity who is well equipped to analyze problems of administration and public policy, and shall have a working knowledge in criminal justice commensurate to the powers and duties of the office. All right, so fellow subcommittee members, which parts of this do we want to keep? And I kind of have a broad suggestion that we could replace the word city council with hiring, I don't know, subcommittee or right, but whatever, some smaller section of the full board would act as a hiring group, and then they would present the nominees to the full group. And so we're basically replacing the word council with the words board and subset of the board.
Thank you, Coach.
And a lot of that Carried on.
No, thank you. Co-chair Ajay.
Yeah, well, I think you might have answered my question just now when you said subsection of the board, because I was like, do we have the power to even say that around what the like subcommittees for the board or what, you know? Because it seems like the other committee would be doing that. But if it's like, you know, yeah, the subcommittee staff or something like that, then yeah, I feel like that makes sense to me.
Yep.
And then what do y'all think about the qualifications paragraph? I can see that it might be stuff that's subject to interpretation, but overall, I think it's a good statement to start with. Any thoughts?
Commissioner Monica.
I agree. It is also pretty vague. And sometimes I wonder if that's good or not. To be so specific about what exactly degree you should have and things like that. If it's going to take away some good it's quite vague.
Thank you, Commissioner Monica. Commissioner Ajay, your hand is still up, so I'm just wanting to check in with you. Okay. Staff?
Yeah, so to the degree that, you know, the Police Accountability Commission is setting up the board, the question about how specific to be is ultimately a question about how deferential does the commission want to be to the board, and in making those sorts of decisions, right? Less written down and more latitude for the oversight board would be more trusting towards that entity, and more written down and less space in which to move would be less trusting of that entity. And there's reasons that you may want to be more or less trusting. It's not an objectively a blanket thing. Also, there will be a training, maybe a small word, but a strong word, but a briefing from city attorney's office on sort of what goes into code versus other types of law and policy. They have mentioned that to us, that they would like to kind of provide some clarity there. So that's something that might be of assistance. And certainly there's flexibility. Sometimes you can elevate something to a higher level of law to make it be changed by so for example, if something's in code and it goes into the charter, it can only be changed, as Commissioner Dan mentioned, Co-Chair Dan mentioned, by a vote of the people. And maybe that's advantageous. On the other hand, if it's moved downward, that makes it able to be adjusted by council, and that might be advantageous to whatever the commission wants to achieve. So I think that's just something to keep in mind as you work through this, is that that you're setting up what the oversight board will be, and to what degree it's helpful to be deferential or not to that entity as it exists once it does. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Co-Chair Dan.
Well, I see I think the word trust is not exactly the word that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about setting up institutional foundation that can't be messed with, so that no matter who ends up being on the new board, that there will be certain things that will be necessary so that the board will function in the way that this commission is envisioning. So what I'm seeing lacking in this description about the director is anything about experience with the community, or the communities of color and the other people who are subjected to police violence. So I think that would be something we might want to put in some kind of language there about their experience and knowledge. Should also include working with communities affected by police brutality.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Conduct. More broad.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Co-Chair Dan's sentiment, that just concern because, we're figuring out how the director would be hired by a board that we're not figuring out how that board's going to be appointed or how many people are going to be on it. And we really don't know how things could go in the future. So I think the clearer we could be, because the last thing we would want is a scenario where a simple majority of a board that could easily be swayed one direction or another could then appoint a director. And if we have very loose guidelines about the director, then all of a sudden someone with their working knowledge in criminal justice is very much on a different perspective than this commission ever intended things to be. And then all of a sudden we have a very weak oversight board that nothing is really ever going to change. So I think, I think working with people of color, working with oppressed communities, whatever language like co-chair Dan was suggesting that we could sort of work in and sort of think about. And then I think whatever description we have here, you also want to think about how could this go in the other direction and someone still fulfills that same description, and how can we amend the description to make it more clear?
Thank you, Commissioner Tim. I also want to say that staff says the commission is setting up the board, including its size and how it's appointed, etc. So co-chair Ajay.
Yeah, I want to echo a lot of things that were said, and also, the specific idea of recognized judgment and integrity specifically, like those things seem fairly subjective to me. I'm not sure how you would define legally recognized judgment and integrity, and also the fact that historically, folks with recognized judgment and integrity have still enacted horrific harms on communities of color, including the police, including judges, including, many different respected professions and populations. So, yeah, I guess to echo Commissioner Handelman's comments around having folks that have familiarity with the sort of apartheid legal system that we have and the discrepancies that exist. And that's not objectivity, though. In fact, I think that objectivity could actually be a negative in this situation. Like, I would prefer to have somebody that would be strongly on the side of the community and on the side of communities of color, because that's why we're doing this in the first case, right? Because we're seeing power is not being evenly shared or distributed, and that we're seeing a lot of power over communities of color, and we're trying to rectify that, right? So it doesn't serve us to treat police and community equally in that way, because that's not objectivity, that's not equity, that's actually privileging people that have already been historically privileged.
Thank you so much, co-chair. Any other questions? Discussion? Can we move on? Thank you.
Okay, so the last section from that part of the code is the director shall be removed from office only upon finding of cause and by a vote of 4 or more members of the council. And again, we're not going to define how many votes are going to be taken by the board in our subcommittee, because we're dealing with the staff itself. But I think we should maybe twist that language around again and say, the director shall be removed from office only upon finding of cause and by an appropriately appropriate supermajority of the board. And that way, that number, the specific number, can be thought of by other people, but that it shouldn't be as easy as simple majority to remove the director, I don't think. Anybody else?
Questions? Can we move on? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Monica.
No, I was going to agree. I was going to agree that a majority, I think, would be good. If we don't specify that, I would be worried if a good number of the board is interested in removing this director, but they are unable to for some reason. But I don't know what that number is. That's hard to say.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Can we move on? Great, next one, please.
All right. Actually, Dan, it's still you, I think.
Okay, whatever. So this is another section of the code. It's about staff and delegation. The director may appoint other personnel necessary to carry out the provisions of this chapter when in keeping with the adopted budget of IPR. And I think that sounds like essentially a reflection of what's in the charter. But anybody disagree with including a line like this in the new code? All right, B, the director may delegate to a designee or any or all duties or responsibilities. This may be something we want to think about, whether or not there are some duties that only the director should do, but I think it's a good idea may delegate to a designee all appropriate duties or responsibilities. And in that way, you know, the board, either we or the board can say, well, except for this, this, and this. All right.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Can we move on? Yep.
All right, so here's another one that's dealt with in the charter. The city shall provide suitable office facilities for the director and staff in a location convenient for the public but separate from the bureau, and that's required by the charter there. If anybody thinks we should change it, let me know. And the other one says the director shall comply with the city's purchasing procedures, but shall have sole discretion in choosing consultants to assist with investigations. And we already talked in our previous meeting about there may be some consultants or members of the staff that we want the board to be able to weigh in on, because this is an inverted structure, and the current structure, the IPR has the CRC reporting to them. This time the director is going to report to the board. So we might want to clarify that second piece by saying that they shall have the discretion in choosing consultants to assist with investigations with board input in certain situations or something like that. And we don't have to spell out the situations necessarily, but just to make it clear that the board should be consulted in some times. That make sense? Am I talking to myself? Oh, okay.
I see fingers. Any discussion or questions? Can we move on? Yes, we can. Continue on. We've already been through the budget. And thank you for that conversation, Tim. And then other questions, I believe, have been dispersed. These have been dispersed throughout the rest of the document. So should we go to the top of the document, Co-Chair Dan?
If you think we have enough time, I'd be more than excited if we can get through some of the top of the document.
I believe we have time. So here we are at the table of contents. And then we have agency director qualifications and hiring process. Do you want to take us through that?
Yeah. All right. So qualifications hiring process. A1A from Charter 2-1005. The board shall hire a director to manage the professional administrative staff and professional investigators and to make operational and administrative decisions, and shall be appointed by and serve at the will and pleasure of the board.
Thank you. Any questions? Discussion?
So this is where we're going to affirm this language into our final document, Dr. Moses. So what are the questions we do for that part?
Yes. Do you agree with the proposed language? I need to see something or not. Thank you. Is there any opposition to the proposed language? No opposition. Then we'll accept this language. A1B.
All right, A1B. Selection of the board shall be done through a community process led by the Oversight Board.
So this has a question mark in front of it. Are you sure you want this language?
Right, that is a good question. So I think that this is kind of where the stuff that we worked on tonight is going to have to be integrated in here later. So we talked about that other part in the other process where, you know, some subset of the board will put out the job description and pick three down, you know, get it down to 3 candidates. But we didn't talk about community involvement. I think this is a great idea to add this. So I would suggest that we leave this language in.
Is there strong opposition to the proposed?
Staff has their hand raised.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I did not see that. Staff?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so because this isn't going to be the final text, it doesn't need to have a vote. I think the same way that it's, or I should say a decision consensus question, just because, you know, there's going to be this entire section that the subcommittee just talked about down below. It would not replace, but would be integrated with the below this section that was just reviewed in terms of how the hiring would go from city code. That is what would be moving up in this particular case. But if there is any comments, and then we can ask if there's if it's okay to move on, just to clarify there, if there is text that co-chairs feel is likely to be final, we could do that. But
yeah, I think that's what we talked about, staff. I think we were saying that if any of this stuff can be baked in today, then we'll do that, and that way we don't have to do it again at the next meeting. So you know, if people are comfortable putting this language in, I'd like to lock it in today if we can do that. Lock that answer in. My final answer.
Okay. So Commissioner Monica?
So are we going to then cut and paste from what we reviewed in the bottom and put up, because this is hiring process, right? So we do need to go grab it and put it up there and replace wherever it says council and replace it with board and go through that process right now. That would just bake it in.
I don't think we need to do it now. I think that's what the co-chair, MHE, and I are going to do between now and the next meeting.
Okay.
So that what I'm hoping to do is take the stuff that we agreed on previously, lock that in, and we move that other stuff up and lock that in at the next meeting, then send it on to the commission. Make sense? Now we have the context of the other stuff to understand what this all means.
Yeah, so this section is really like, we can't finalize anything in this section right now, because all that stuff that we worked on has to go in here, right? Or am I missing something?
Well, my proposal would be that we lock in this thing that say there should be a community process led by the oversight board, because that wasn't even part of the existing code. And then the next one, it says in Denver, we should remove that, but the process shall lead to the selection of 3 candidates. And that's in the city code that we just looked at. So I don't see a reason why we couldn't lock that in right now either.
Sure.
Okay. But do you want to see it? Well, okay.
Staff hand is raised.
I'm sorry, staff, go right ahead. I'm confused.
yeah, sorry, I'm a little confused too. So just trying to clarify that it is slightly different. The current code says at least 3, whereas this says 3. So I'm trying to avoid being in a situation where the subcommittee has made 2 conflicting decisions, you know, back to back, just for the interest of clarity in helping develop the document. I think the question is, you know, to what degree is the text you're looking at adding the going to be the final text in the document? Because otherwise it'll have to be revisited anyway, was the question, right? So it would otherwise be like, if you would need to ask the questions again next week, or 2 weeks from today, sorry, then yeah, that's, I think, where the confusion is. It might be helpful to kind of address the open-ended question, because there is a question in the comment for this particular section A1. If that might be also valid to bring in at this time, the how the community is involved in this, what is the nature of the community involvement might be helpful to shape that eventual text, whatever it is, as well.
Okay, thank you so much, staff. So instead of calling for finalizing this, let's dive deeper into answering some of the questions that are out here on the slide. Will the community be involved before narrowing to 3 candidates? Does this mean there will be at least community input on which of the 3 candidates to pick during some kind of public Q&A from the finalists?
Dr. Moses, I think at this point we're at 8:50, and I feel like we'd probably be better off waiting until we have the integrated stuff next time.
Okay, that is absolutely fine. That sounds great.
But before we do that, can we just get a feel on A1B? Do we want there be a community process, which is not in the existing city code? Okay, looks like we got an okay on that one. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
affirmative. Very good. Okay, so then we would like to take public comment on the issues that the subcommittee is discussing, or community members can tell their story about policing and police accountability. This subcommittees now allow members of the public to give public comment to up to 3 minutes in length. Please raise your hand in Zoom if you would like to speak. I do not see any hands raised. So we can move on. Thank you so much. So that brings us to our conclusion, our next steps, and I would like to invite in staff to discuss the next steps.
Thank you. So the next meeting of the subcommittee is Monday, April 17th. That is 2 weeks from today. The goal is to have a draft document approved by the end of that meeting. And also prior to it, to have members of the subcommittee have time to review that document and give input. So co-chairs and staff will ensure the document is updated, formatted, and organized by integrating everything that was just discussed after page 8. So pages 8 to 15 were discussed on March 13th. Pages 15 on were just discussed today. And based on the comments and what was highlighted in there as things to integrate, that's going to get integrated up into the eventual document, which is a built out version of pages 1 through 8. We'll have that circulated hopefully by the end of the week so that there can be feedback and track changes that's assembled. There's time for the members of the subcommittee to look at it, provide feedback and track changes, and recirculate that so that you have time to see it. So that there's a draft document entering April 17th, which all subcommittee members have already seen, and ideally had the time to already propose changes to. And those changes won't be determined outside of the meeting. They can be proposed, but a final decision on those will be at the public meeting. So on April 17th, those changes that suggested changes will be shown in track changes or in comments. And then there's the idea is that on the 17th, the full meeting is basically spent working through the document, making decisions on it, and eventually referring it to the full commission. The full commission is meeting on the 13th and has other content to discuss. And then on the 20th, again, it's meeting, and that meeting will hopefully be the first time it can take a look at this referred document. And between the 20th, 24th, 27th, there will be 2 or 3 full commission meetings that will ideally finish the full commission consideration and eventually approval of the document. So that's sort of the process that this document is going to go through. Any questions on any of that? Co-chairs, do you have anything you wanted to add on that part or build out? I kind of gave broad strokes.
Yeah, no, it just, yeah, if you can send us that document as soon as it's ready tonight, then we should be able to get it back to you. We're probably going to work on it on Friday.
Great. Thank you. I'll pass it back over to Dr. Moses.
Thank you so much. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up our meeting. So next slide, garden plot. Staff, do you have any garden plot items?
There's the one thing that was flagged for a legal question. I'm trying to find it in the document, but other than that, nothing else.
Very good. What about
Oh, I guess the item that was flagged for possibly in the transition too.
legal and transition?
Commissioner Monica has her hand raised.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Steph, I think you offered to ask IPR about
Yeah.
their thoughts on the number of investigators and cases and stuff.
Yeah, so that
That would be great.
Definitely going to do that. Not sure if that technically is garden plot, just because it may not be during a public meeting if they're unable to come. But yes, that's also something that I'm not sure if that's going to happen between now and the next meeting. Happy to talk to co-chairs and see if that's something they'd like to do between now and then, or they'd like to do after. But either way, happy to make it happen. And just to clarify, the legal question was about whether a hiring freeze applying to the new oversight board would be a violation of the independent judgment clause that's in the charter amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Co-chair, do you have any garden plots?
I promised that I would work on a spreadsheet to sort of lay out what the different jobs are that we. So I was hoping we'd double back to that list because it's very long. But yeah, I'm going to get that spreadsheet to everybody too, along with this revised document.
Thank you so much.
There's also the question of how we want the community to be involved in the hiring processes. Like, we didn't really discuss that. We just kind of mentioned it. So.
Okay. Thank you. All right. As we
Staff, I think staff, did you raise your hand again? You have something?
Yeah, just because we have like 1 extra minute, if with your indulgence, Dr. Moses, I would like to show one thing on the screen. Because I do think what Co-Chair Dan mentioned is definitely something relevant to just keep in mind, not to discuss at this exact moment, which is the number of different tasks that may be sent over to, or that may be specialties among the staff. And it's this entire list here of different things, if I understand correctly. So just since we have a minute, figured I would show that on screen as something to keep in mind for context, both generally and in response to Commissioner Tim's question from earlier.
Very good. Thank you so much. That is so helpful.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I would like us to then go ahead and move on to our close. As a reminder, you can now submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. There are many different ways to connect with the commission. Thank you all. Next slide. Thank you all. Thank you to all of the members who attended tonight's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you to our interpreters. And finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. If you have not already done so, please sign up for email updates, and you can also sign up to receive updates from the PAC. Meeting of the subcommittee. Our next meeting of the subcommittee will be Monday, April 17th. It is now 8:59 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.